victory at 3 o'clock this morning. Yeah. Hello! I feel sorry for those who are speaking this afternoon because I might need some extra coffee. So Andrew gave me some very clear guidelines for my presentation, and I'm going to be talking about the confluence of artificial intelligence, legacy data, and the future of mineral discovery. So you're going to see some elements of technology in here, some elements of politics, some elements of economics and commercial stuff. This is the world of the junior, and as Andrew said, I'm now running my 5th junior, so this is the world in which I live in. So what is this keynote actually all about? We're not short of data in the industry. There is much data in the industry, but we're short of integrated decision-making data. And that's not to make a technical success, that is to make a commercial success. So how does artificial intelligence contribute to that? It helps us reduce avoidable uncertainty. You'll see in the theme of my presentation, it is not a black box, it is not a panacea, it is not a magic wand like many people think it is. It's a tool to help geologists make better commercial decisions at the end. Now, in the presentation, I'm going to be using my company, Botswana Minerals, as a case study to show how legacy data could be finding the next new copper region in Botswana. And I know I've got some very good friends, and my very dear friend Mosa Mabusa here from the CGS at the back. I'd like to make some comments as well about how governments and technology providers, which are many of you here, can actually help us shorten the learning cycle without contributing to lowering technical standards. And that's really important as you see I get into the presentation. So why is this all important? Well, let's just kind of step back, and I've got a couple of slides on supply and demand. Well, this is demand. Now, if you look at how important critical minerals are to energy security, industrial policy, defense capability, you name it. You've all got cell phones with you. You look how America is so focused on critical minerals at the moment. It's become an area of competitive advantage. However, if you look at this and you look at where we are at the moment, just look at the unrealistic demand requirements for lithium, copper, and critical minerals in the graphs on the right-hand side. Now, these are multiples of what we are currently mining. So clearly, if we have to produce multiples of what we're currently mining to feed critical mineral security, we need to explore and we need to find those mines quicker than we've actually ever done before. So the implication for exploration is absolutely critical. We need to find those new deposits, but we need to find it in a capital market which is still risk averse in terms of exploration. So there is your dichotomy. The world needs copper, the world needs critical minerals, but the world doesn't really want to fund the exploration which is going to help us produce those minerals. So what I'm going to be talking about here is how AI and the folk in this room can actually help reduce that uncertainty and reduce that risk to enable to produce a more sustainable environment going into the future. So here's the exploration productivity problem. Discovery has become more difficult, we all know this, and I'm sure many presenters will talk about this later on in the day. The shallow and obvious is maybe too strong a word, deposits have all been found, but don't forget those explorers of 50, 100 and more years ago had to work with their own challenges at that time. So most of those deposits have been found in what I call mature jurisdictions. So where will future discoveries come from? Chiefly undercover, chiefly where there's a lot of noise in the geophysical environment, and chiefly in countries where there's perceived high political risk. So the challenge for us as explorers is to try and extract as much as we can from every single exploration dollar and de-risk our exploration so we can encourage the confidence of investors into companies such as my own and yours, so we can find those next new deposits. So essentially, it's about not just simply deeper drilling, about better integration before drilling. So now I'm going to move from data acquisition to data exploitation. And in this particular section of the presentation, I want to comment that we've become very good at collecting data, but very poor, I think, at extracting meaning from it. And I'm going to use kind of a tongue-in-cheek analogy with this, is that I've been banking with the same bank for 30 years. They still have no idea who I am. They've got 30 years of data. And that's just bizarre and crazy, isn't it? But it's the same thing in our world too as well, but I thought that would actually resonate with you. So why is geoscience so well suited to artificial intelligence? Well, we're going to be talking about this a lot during the course of the day. It's multivariate. We look at rocks, we look at structure, we look at alteration, geochemistry, geophysics, drilling. There are so many different variables in our world which we actually deal with. They're spatial. They occupy three-dimensional space. And because we're only looking at a tiny pinprick in a vast Earth, it is also probabilistic. So those are very important features of this. So what does modern AI help us actually do? It helps us interrogate these large heterogeneous databases and look for patterns which would take an army of geologists to find after a considerable period of time. So what it helps us do is it helps us provide an auditable analysis of complex geological evidence. And this is something that you can present to your board, non-technical people, and they will actually get it and understand it. So I'm going to be using in the presentation, throughout the presentation, commentary on Botswana minerals and how we're using it. Because it's all well and good to talk from theory. So I'd like to kind of demonstrate this in practice too as well. And why I say Botswana minerals is unusual in juniors, we have a very, very large database going back over 20 years. As such, a lot of it is proprietary. And why I say it's unusual is juniors tend to have a life cycle of anything between 3 and 5 years. And you'll see later on in the presentation, I give a commentary that 90% of juniors fail, which means that data disappears. So the majors, of course, the Anglo-Americans, the Rio Tintos, the BHPs have got vast amounts of data, so they're probably doing all of what I say themselves. But for a junior, it is very, very unusual. This database is very extensive. It contains all the normal kind of geological multivariate data which you would expect. But it's not just the volume of the data which is important. It's actually re-looking at that data in the lens of current demand for critical minerals, which I mentioned a moment ago, but also current thinking around geological models, because geological models are not static. And I want to use a very brief example of this, that one of the companies I was involved with was a precious stone explorer in Israel which found diamonds. And for those people who are diamond geologists, you would think, well, you can't find diamonds in young volcanics. Well, of course you can't, but I see Dr. Tanya Marshall is here. Tanya and I went to Israel to look at these deposits, and there are rafts of kimberlitic material which had been previously subducted, which are in new volcanics. Now, I wasn't taught that at university, so geological models and geological thinking are actually all changing. So the challenge for us is how can we interrogate this without using the assumptions of earlier campaigns, without bringing that level of bias actually into it. And I'll be talking about that as we actually go through. So what is our workflow? From old data to investable targets. And that word investable is a really, really key issue, because it's not something which is, we're looking for a technical success. I need to raise money, and I raise money off retail investors, chiefly from the UK and Ireland, and they need to have some level of assurance that they might actually make a bit of money at the end of the day. So we collect the data, we clean the data, we interrogate it, we model it, we rank it, and we validate it. And this is something I can share with my board actually all the time, and it's something which they will actually understand. So the output is not just a map, it's a ranked investment and technical decision framework based on probabilities. So there's a probability around, has that potential deposit, it's not even a deposit, has that potential mineralized zone got the potential to be a commercial target? So we use something called the glass box approach. You all would have heard the black box approach. You type into ChatGPT, where am I going to find the next gold deposit? And it'll tell you. Well, don't believe it for a minute, of course. We use something called a glass box approach, which means that we can actually interrogate the data in a way which only a geologist can do. We've got all the data which I explained earlier. We've got 57 different deposit models where the geology, the geochemistry, the geophysics for all those different deposit models has been very clearly defined, and we use machine learning and AI to look for those deposit models inside the data and give it a probability. And of course, there are many things that kind of get in the way, like cultural anomalies and those kind of things, and that's when you need the geologist to come and interrogate it. And importantly as well, is when you're looking at historical data, you need to look at it through the lens of what was the world like, what was politics like, what was the economics like at that particular point in time, and why did people make decisions at that point in time, and for what reason. But you can't look at it through the lens of today. You've got to look at it through the lens of the past. My mother was a historian, so she kind of ground into me the importance of actually learning from history. So this provides you a very strong governance output in terms of a probabilistic approach. So if I look at data fusion and the different layers we actually have, is that artificial intelligence doesn't treat data as isolated products, but mutually constraining and actually all working together. So obviously the geochemistry must reflect the geology. The hyperspectral must reflect the geology. And if you can't see the geology, you've got to try and pick it up from historical borehole. So it goes beyond what I would call push-button exploration. And you'll see this possibly marketed by many AI providers that give us your data and we'll tell you where the deposits are. It's actually not as simple as that. You've got to interrogate it, you've got to understand the geological structure. And if you don't understand the geological structure and the geological models at the very beginning of your analysis, then you're lost. And I always like to kind of credit Alex van Zijl, my very first boss 40 years ago or so. And he drove into me then about the importance of geological models before you start your work. And actually nothing has changed. It's just become a lot quicker and a lot more efficient. So this leads on to my next statement. I think I've preempted this one to a large degree, about why deposit models matter so much. And one of the key IPs around the service provider we're using with is their very, very detailed geological models. And a lot of work actually has to go into it. But you mustn't be myopic about it. That, I mentioned the example of diamonds in Israel. That's a new geological model. And as we go into each different geological frontier, you will find different elements of geological models, particularly when you're looking for copper deposits. So you try not to be too myopic, you try and keep them as wide open as you can, so you don't actually bias your thinking in terms of where the mineralization could actually come from. You've got to look at your permissive host rocks. You've got to look at fluid pathways. So how is the fluid going to migrate along the structure? How is it going to concentrate? And what are the concentrating mechanisms? And for us, we've identified a multi-commodity, copper, silver, most importantly, and I'm going to be talking about that momentarily. So this gives you prospectivity maps and decisions. So a prospectivity map is not a discovery. It gives you an output of a set of anomalies. It gives you probabilities actually around them. And this allows you to, as a decision support tool, to make decisions about what to do next and how to develop it. Do you want to what kind of geophysics do you need to do? What kind of geochemistry do you need to do? And importantly, from a commercial perspective, when do you start thinking about bringing in a joint venture partner? And why that's important for a junior is we raise money against our share price, and the thesis is that as you progress along your mineral cycle and you find things, the share price goes up and people make money. So you're very, very conscious of dilution, and that's why we often look at partnerships with majors and actually others. But the important part here is we must try and quantify that uncertainty. And that's really important. Really have a good look about what you don't know, so you can actually start to mitigate those kind of risks. So from a Botswana perspective, the map on the right gives us some kind of idea of the different mineralized zones we identified in Botswana. And this came from our proprietary database, but also the government has flown much of the air of the country from a geophysical perspective. They've also taken very, very detailed geochemical samples over much of the country. And you can access those for a very small fee, which is wonderful. They also have a very large core store where you can access old core. I haven't tested that part yet, and I probably will test that in the next kind of month or so. So that basically helps us combine the proprietary data with the government data and see where there are potential permissive areas for future exploration. You'll see from this map, and the presentation will be available to everybody if you want to look at it. We identified 3 major copper areas. Obviously the main copper belt, where you've got the Mateo and the Khoemacau mines. You've got the southeastern part of the country, in the Limpopo mobile belt, where it was on this side of the border, you had the Messina copper mine. And for those of you who don't know, Mossa will know, is the Venetia mine could well have been a copper mine, because Angloval discovered a major copper deposit, and then De Beers discovered Venetia actually on top of it. Probably regretting that now. They probably think it would be much better to be a copper mine. But there are equally copper deposits on the other side. And our thesis, and I'm going to talk about it on the next slide in a little bit more detail, was that there was a connection between the Zambian copper belt in the north of the country and the Namibian copper belt in the north of their country through Ngami land in northwest Botswana. Other workers have just drawn straight lines, but for the geologists out here, there's no such thing as a straight line. It's got to follow a geological boundary. So this is a representation of that, and this is why we focused in the northwest part of the country, probably one of the most remote parts of Botswana. It's more remote than the Kalahari in the middle. And what we took out 7,000 square kilometers, and we have begun to do work in that area. And what has been very pleasing is just very recently we've been able to access quarterly reports, some going back over 40 years. And in those quarterly reports by uranium and diamond explorers, they would log no kimberlite. Well, that's marvelous and that's helpful. But in their quarterly reports, they'll show photographs of chalco varieties and other copper mineralization, which basically supports our hypothesis of the connection between the 2 copper belts. So how do you move from an algorithm to a field decision? Because after all, in a junior, that's what you're looking for. You've got your technical base, but how can you actually commercialize it? Well, the first thing for geologists, AI is here not to replace the geologist, and this is not self-serving, because, as Andrew said, I'm a geologist primarily, and I'm very proud to be a geologist too as well. But this actually helps us do our work much quicker, much more efficient, but with our eyes wide open in terms of the risk and uncertainty. So human judgment still provides context, skepticism, that's really important, and accountability. You shouldn't go into an area where there's been lots of copper explorers before you and expect maybe to find copper. You go into an area where people have been looking for uranium and diamonds, where perhaps